what they're talking about is not that the entire military would turn on the president, but that they would create a pretext, and of course with the help of the media, the mainstream media, they would create a pretext that something is going on that requires legitimate military action, which cannot happen. There is no legitimate situation that the military could get involved in that would involve taking out the president.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Before we begin this important interview with Colonel Richard Black and Harley Schlanger, just a quick word from this interview's sponsor. Friends, it's been about 1 month since wildfires started in California, Oregon, and now Seattle. And fires like these represent a real risk to the grid or potentially to your own home. And if you're ever in such a situation, you want to make sure you're as prepared as possible, which is why I have the solar water heater. The solar panels installed on the heater generate the electricity needed, so you never have to worry about wires or batteries when camping. It's lightweight, only 2.6 pounds, so you'll barely notice it in your backpack. It also comes with a 100% lifetime guarantee replacement. If you want your own solar water heater, please click the link. I'll leave it below this interview, and use coupon code SGT15 to save 15% off. Hey friends, thank you so much for tuning in. It's wonderful to have you all back, whether you're finding us at sgtreport.tv, on Patreon or YouTube, maybe even over at sgtreport.com. This video is public. I'd like you to spread it around, make it go viral, because friends, in this one we're talking about the battle for the very soul of our nation with Colonel Richard Black and Harley Schlanger. Let me welcome them both. Harley, first you, how are you?
Fine, Sean. Good to be back with you.
Hey, thanks for arranging this with Colonel Richard Black, who on September 7th, he blew the whistle, warning of a potential military coup. Richard, thanks for joining us.
It's good to be with you.
Well, it's very good to have you, sir. These are the times that try men's souls, gentlemen. I'm not sure what you all thought of the presidential debate on Tuesday night, but I did notice Chris Wallace, Harley, try to put the president in the corner and basically demand that he accept whatever election results are to be had, even if the ballot counting goes on for weeks after the election. You're afraid of it. I'm afraid of it. I think Colonel Richard Black is afraid that these dirty Democrats are going to try to steal the election. Your thoughts on any of that, Harley?
Well, I think what we're facing is a constitutional crisis. And I think it's because the people who have been running a coup against President Trump since he came into office, and we're seeing more and more of this come out from FBI leaks, and Ratcliffe just released some more documents, the Flynn case and so on. They don't want him in the White House. And what Colonel Black put together for our conference a few weeks ago was a very compelling picture of how the military former military leaders are setting the stage for a military coup, using the argument that Trump will lose the election because the polls say he's down, and then he'll refuse to go. And what you pointed out is that was Chris Wallace's assumption in the discussion last night. So I think the best thing is to get Colonel Black's assessment of where things stand in terms of the threat of a military coup in the United States.
Colonel Black, we'll turn it over to you, but I would just like to at least draw attention to the fact that the president is rightly concerned when we see ballot harvesting happening in Minneapolis, in Ilhan Omar's district, thanks to Project Veritas. We're seeing all sorts of mysterious ballots end up in the garbage can all over the country, many of them said to be ballots for Donald Trump. My fear is they're going to steal the election and then use the military to oust the president, Richard. Is that your fear?
Well, I think it's something that we need to be discussing. If you would like, I could let me give you just a. I fought with the Marines in Vietnam. I flew 269 combat missions, came back with bullet holes in four times. I then volunteered to fight on the ground with the 1st Marine Division, made 70 combat patrols as a forward air controller, and was involved in extremely fierce combat. And on the last patrol, both of my radio men were killed right beside me, and I was wounded. I went back to law school afterwards and re-entered the Army JAG Corps, and was in a number of assignments, including one where I was involved in putting down the 1992 LA riots with the 7th Infantry Division, which was under control of I Corps. And I went on to be the chief of the criminal law division for the Army at the Pentagon, where I testified before Congress on several occasions. I advised the Senate Armed Services Committee on high-profile military matters, and I prepared executive orders for the president's signature. So I have been involved in military justice for many, many years. My total military career spanned 32 years. And since then, I've been a member of the Virginia House and the Virginia Senate over a span of about 20 more years. But I was very concerned when I began to look at some of the things that were happening. When the president walked over to St. John's Church near the White House, he went there the night before. Violent mobs had seized control of that part of Washington, D.C., and they had torched St. John's, did a lot of damage. And the president believed rightly that the people needed to see that their president remained in control, that the mobs had not taken over. And he legitimately and lawfully used the National Guard troops to clear a path so that he could safely walk from the White House to St. John's, which he did. And there he posed holding up a Bible, and he made the point. First, the government is in control. It is not the mob. Secondly, we do not appreciate the mob burning churches and attacking Christianity in particular. And he held up a Bible to make that point. Now, afterwards, there was this very, very well coordinated attack on the president by very senior retired generals and former secretaries of defense. And they were led, it appears from everything that I can see, they were led by General James Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense. You might recall that James Mattis resigned as Secretary of Defense in 2018 in a successful effort to block the president from withdrawing troops from Syria, which is something he had promised to do. In any event, on June the 3rd, James Mattis made a very frightening denunciation of the president. He began by praising the rioters for their wholesome and unifying demands. Now, if there is something wholesome or something unifying about torching churches, beating people in the streets, assassinating policemen in their cars, if that is his definition of wholesome and unifying, then he and I live on two different planets. But in any event, he denounced the president in scathing terms. He said, "We're witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership." And then he went on and he made a very odd comment, because he said, "We can unite without him," drawing on the strengths inherent in our civil society. The question is, what exactly did Mattis mean by saying we can unite without him? After all, he is the elected president of the United States. So how is it that we can unite without him? Because obviously he was envisioning a federal government that no longer had the president seated. This was quite coordinated, and then we had General Colin Powell come out on the 7th of June, and he praised all of the officers, including Mattis, who had spoken out in recent days, and he agreed. He said the president's the first president in his lifetime who is not trying to unite the country. Well, he seems to have forgotten President Obama when he says that. But in any event, what we had then was we had a series of four-star generals who came out. One that stuck out was retired Marine Corps General John Allen, who very arrogantly claimed that Donald Trump isn't religious, he has no need of religion, and doesn't care about the devout, except insofar as they serve his political needs. And then he says that his speech at St. John's was an example of abject and arbitrary power. Then we had Navy Admiral Mike Mullen, who said, "It sickened me yesterday to see security personnel forcibly and violently clearing a path through Lafayette Square to accommodate the president's visit." I got to tell you, these security personnel, they were not using force against people who were simply moving aside so that the president could walk over to St. John's. There was no force used that was not necessary. But in any event, William Perry, a former defense secretary under Clinton, says, "I'm outraged at the deplorable behavior of our president and their effort to suppress peaceful demonstrators exercising their constitutional right." I got to tell you, these peaceful cities all over this country, the idea that they are exercising their constitutional rights. There is no constitutional right to murder. There is no constitutional right to commit arson. There is no constitutional right to loot and steal. And there's certainly no constitutional right to be gunning down police officers in their cars. And there have been quite a number at this point. So in any event, it began to concern me because I was seeing a very systematic pattern of what was taking place. Now, the next thing that we see is on August the 11th, there were two lieutenant colonels, John Nagel and Paul Yingling, and they wrote an open letter to General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they urged him to use military force to remove the president of the United States. And they said if Donald Trump refuses to leave office at the expiration of his constitutional term, which is on January the 20th, the United States military must remove him by force, and you must give that order. Now, if it were just that you had two lieutenant colonels who perhaps sat around with a bottle of rum and had too much and they concocted a letter, that would be one thing. But when that letter gets published in a respected defense publication like Defense One, which has advertisers like Boeing and Raytheon, then you begin to think something is afoot, and it's not a very good thing. It's not a very healthy thing. In that same publication, Defense One, they come out then in very short order, August the 18th, and they publish an article entitled 6 Scenarios for Military Intervention After January the 20th. Again, talking about removal of the president. So you have all of these things. Now, also, intertwined in all of this, the president from early on had threatened to use the Insurrection Act to put down the violence that's taking place. I think in Portland, what's it, up to 3 months now or so, that every night they've been out smashing windows, torching buildings, threatening, beating people up, occasionally some murders taking place. And so the president threatened to use the Insurrection Act. And so in the very, very well-known publication, Foreign Policy, they published a morning brief entitled "Generals Denounce Trump's Protest Crackdown Plan." And they subtly disparaged this Insurrection Act as a 2-century-old law. That kind of reminds you of Dick Cheney when he refers to the military's ban on homosexuals as an old chestnut. The fact is that the U.S. Constitution is a very old set of laws, but it's one that we live by. Now, the Insurrection Act was first enacted in 1807, and it has been repeatedly used to carry out government's most elemental responsibility, which is ensuring domestic tranquility. And just to give you some idea of the usage of this, it started off with Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, Grover Cleveland, Woodrow Wilson, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and George H.W. Bush. All of them invoked the Insurrection Act to stop riots, enforce desegregation orders, and military disturbances, and quell labor disputes. So the idea that somehow this is a remote piece of ancient law is quite absurd. It's one of the very fundamental laws that the United States has relied on to maintain domestic tranquility. And retaining domestic tranquility is one of the 4 purposes for which the Constitution was enacted. So we have all of these things taking place, and they take place with sort of on top of something that occurred back in 2017. Now I'm jumping back before all of these other things, but there was a deep state publication by the name of The Conversation. It was first established by a $10 million grant and contributions from 4 Australian institutes of higher learning, and it very quickly began to expand into the United Kingdom, United States, France, a whole series of things. And they were talking about a military coup in the United States, and they laid out in quite explicit detail what needed to be done. They talk about the fact that it is going to be necessary to lock down communications across the United States if a coup were to be successfully carried out. And they said that this could be done through the U.S. Cyber Command by having the intelligence agencies launch a simulated foreign attack on the United States, a foreign cyber attack that we would make appear as though it had come from China or from Russia or from somewhere else. And that would be used as the pretext to shut down all communications so that the president's supporters could not rally. The president would not be able to to communicate by Twitter, and in fact, and the article, what was amazing about it, they talk about the communications that all troop movements in the United States come through the national under the control of senior officials. So I think what we've got, I see this all this talk of coup as kind of a plan B, and I think it's absolutely critical that we get the word out to the American people that there very well may be some uncertainty about the outcome of the presidential election. But whether that happens or not, there are roles for the judiciary, there are roles for Congress, there are roles for the president himself in resolving the outcome of the election.
Right.
We've had contested elections before, we may have them again, but it's important for people to recognize under our system of government, there is absolutely no role for the military in deciding the outcome of an election. And we need to make sure that people in the military understand that, and that the civilians understand that. I served in battle with the 1st Marine Division, and I'm going to tell you the idea that there would even be speculation that the 1st Marine Division would somehow get involved in this would just horrifies me. But what they're talking about is not that the entire military would turn on the president, but that they would create a pretext, and of course with the help of the media, the mainstream media, they would create a pretext that something is going on that requires legitimate military action, which cannot happen. There is no legitimate situation that the military could get involved in that would involve taking out the president. I am very troubled as I watch this that I have seen no kickback from General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. There's not been a whisper. We've got open talk of insurrection and of overthrowing the president of the United States. And General Mark Milley has said nothing in response to this openly published letter to him. We have Secretary Esper, Secretary of Defense, and he hasn't whispered a word. And yet this is being talked about all over the place. Now, there is a provision of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's Article 88. Now, this is congressional law, and Article 88 applies to retired general officers. In fact, all retired officers, and it prohibits the use of contemptuous language against the president. Now, what that means is that there's no problem with someone saying, I think that Joe Biden might make a better president and I support him. That's okay. You could say, I disagree with the president's policy of doing this or that. But when you begin to make statements that involve contemptuous words directed at the president, then you are in violation of criminal law. And yet, despite that, I see no hint of anything coming out of the Pentagon saying, look, guys, you need to watch your language when you are discussing the president. You can talk about policy, but don't don't use contemptuous words against the president.
Right.
Um,
Richard, let me just jump in and say, first of all, I appreciate all of that important information because we do need to get the word out for the American people, because I think these people are going to put us all in a corner. And I would just like to note that on Tuesday night during the debate, Biden called the protesters in front of the White House peaceful. So they continue to misrepresent everything, including the activities of BLM and Antifa. But Harley, you and I have talked about this for so many months now. What's been happening is an attempted coup. This has been an ongoing bit of treason and sedition from deep state players. It goes right to the top. We have this newly declassified document from John Ratcliffe proving that basically the Russia hoax was Hillary's plan, and the Obama-Biden White House was briefed on it, I believe by Brennan. And as we're having this conversation today, friends, FBI Director James Comey is testifying before Congress. Now, unfortunately, he's not in Congress. He gets to do it via Zoom. But Comey just claimed that Trump is a Russian asset, Harley, because Trump said he didn't trust the very same U.S. intelligence agencies that tried to frame him for treason, fueled by Russian disinformation and funded by Hillary Clinton and the DNC in a coup that was led by Comey himself. I mean, we are in upside-down world, and the enemies of the president are now openly talking about removing him after what is sure to be a very unfair election if the Democrats get their wish.
Well, and Sean, we've been discussing this for 3 years, actually, because this goes back to the summer of 2016. It actually goes back to December 2015, when Brennan was first tipped off by the British equivalent of the National Security Agency. They made the whole story up. Even the people who were the cybersecurity experts for the DNC admit they had no evidence of Russian hacking or meddling. The Mueller team could find nothing, but they made stuff up. Peter Strzok made it up. The Flynn case has been exposed thoroughly, and yet the judge is still pushing to keep Flynn to the conviction for supposedly lying. This is a coup, and it can only continue for two reasons. One, the media refuses to touch it. But there's a problem with the Republican Party, which is that because they're so committed to an anti-Russian line and now an anti-China line, that they keep alive the whole hoax that somehow Trump may have some connection to Russia. Now, of course, what Pelosi says is that all roads with Trump lead to Putin. And this is so dangerous because it challenges, as the colonel just identified, the constitutional role of the military, but it also puts us on a course clear. He wants to pull troops out of Afghanistan and Syria. He wants to work with Putin for peaceful cooperation. And if he even thinks about meeting with Putin, he'll be attacked as a Russian agent. So this is a total subversion of our Constitution. And also it's an attack on the American voters who elected Donald Trump in 2016. And it's meant to keep people not to vote for him in 2020 so they can pull off the coup. So I think I commend you, Colonel Black, for your report on this, because people need to know what's going on in the shadows of the so-called shadow government. Because these are people who were officials in the military and in the US government, as you pointed out.
Yes, well, thank you. We're in a very strange time, and you mentioned Russia. I wish that the American people understood that, first of all, Russia has no expansionist philosophy. That died with the Soviet Union and the destruction, the dissolution of the Soviet Union. They have interestingly, they just passed a new constitution that establishes marriage between one man and one woman, something a lot of conservatives tried to do unsuccessfully in this country. They mention God 4 times in their constitution, and they are not the Soviet Union. Their population is half that of the United States. Their economy is roughly the size of Italy's. Their military is the spending on military in Russia is a tiny fraction of what it is in the United States. In fact, the United States military spends as much on armed forces as the next biggest 11 defense spenders in the world, including Russia, China, Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, a whole lot of these enormous spenders.
Well, Richard, let me just jump in and say, you know it, I know it, Harley knows it. China's the much bigger threat, all right? And guess who just got, what, $1.5 billion from China? Hunter Biden. The president tried to bring some of that up on Tuesday night, and of course, at every retort, Biden said, there's no truth in that. There's no truth in that. Harley, let's talk about the biggest threat. The biggest threat to you and I and to Patriots is the deep state, the shadow government.
Well, Sean, I would say the biggest threat we face is from what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Because what Colonel Black was just describing before is what Eisenhower was referring to. But it's a little broader than what Eisenhower said. I mean, it includes the defense contractors, and many of these ex-military people, these generals, end up lobbying for defense contractors or consulting firms that are part of the Beltway and so on. But it also includes now the Silicon Valley crowd. It includes the media. Just a perfect example, the colonel mentioned Defense One. It's a publication owned by Lorene Jobs, the widow of Steve Jobs of Apple. She used the money from Apple Computer to buy Atlantic Monthly, which ran an absolutely scurrilous, lying article saying that President Trump attacked the soldiers, calling them losers and so on in France. It's been denied by even people who don't like Trump, like John Bolton, who was with him. But here you have an interface between the tech sector, the media. Another example of that is Jeff Bezos of Amazon at the Washington Post. Bezos's Amazon has the cloud computing contract for the CIA. So you have this interface of media, of tech companies, of defense contractors that are the ones running the coup against Trump. Now, the reason I say they're a bigger threat than China is that what the president showed in the phase one trade talks with China is that you could have a dialogue with Xi Jinping, who he called his friend, just as he could have a dialogue with Putin. But he can't have a dialogue with Joe Biden, as we saw from the debate last night. You can't have a dialogue with Brennan and Comey and Clapper, who lie repeatedly. And what are they lying to support? Wars. This is why they try to coup the president, because he said he's going to end these wars, bring our troops called enemies, Russia and China, by finding common interests and working together. So I think what we've just heard earlier from Colonel Black is really at the heart of things, that there's a move to create an animosity within, or at least neutralize the average person in the military. So if the generals are called upon on behalf of this military-industrial complex to throw out Trump after they failed with Russiagate, they failed with Ukraine impeachment, they're failing with the insurrection in the cities, that what they would rely on ultimately would be an old-fashioned coup. And that's to defend the post-Cold War order of endless wars and endless bailouts and central banks controlling the finances of every country on the planet. So I think that's where we have to look if we want to find out who the enemy is and why they're doing these things.
Colonel Black, in your view, what is the likelihood of success of this shadowy group implementing a plan to remove Donald Trump from the White House if the election does appear to be rigged to the American people? If there is a contentious election where the ballot counting goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the deep state said, oh, Biden won, and the mainstream media says Biden won, President Trump is now in violation of the Constitution because he won't leave office on January 20th. What is the likelihood of a success of a military coup in a nation where patriots are armed? All right, this isn't Canada, this isn't New Zealand, This isn't Australia. I don't want a civil war here, but what's the likelihood they could pull this off in your view?
Well, I think the more that we get the word out through information like your channel, the more difficult it becomes for them. I think that this was probably viewed as a plan B in case the election does not turn out the way that they want. I see enough indications that they are moving forward with the plan to make it appear rather threatening. But the one thing about a coup is that it must occur in darkness. The article, this one that came out in 2017, says that the plotters of an American military coup would need to deny them information on what's happening, and just importantly, to deny any would-be loyalists the time or ability to act. And I think what we are doing is we are acting just by putting information out. Frankly, if I were a company commander in the 1st Marine Division or in the 10th Mountain Division, and I started hearing talk about a coup to remove the president, I would start to say, you know what, there may be an important role for me in defending the Constitution of the United States, and military officers are not bound to follow unlawful orders. So clearly anything that was directed at removing the president of the United States, whether no matter how things are contested, if that were the order given, that would be an unlawful order. So I think what we're doing is important. I do agree that I don't see our enemy as being foreign. I see it as being domestic. I totally agree with the president on what he's doing with the tariffs with China, but I'm not sure that I am totally in agreement on the need for simply being hostile. I'm very troubled by Secretary Pompeo, who is the least diplomatic Secretary of State that we have ever had. He seldom goes off when he's not talking about some plan or scheme to undermine and overthrow some government or other. I get very nervous with that fellow being where he is. But I think to some extent it's simply a distraction of the deep state to make it appear as though we have all of these foreign threats, when the genuine threat to the Constitution and to our republic is the threat that the deep state will somehow rise up and take over. Historically, if you go back to the Roman Republic, which was sort of the great republic of all time, it ended when Julius Caesar was assassinated by disgruntled members of the Senate. And he made the famous statement as he was dying, "Et tu, Brute," meaning "you too, Brutus," because Brutus was one of the coup members who was executing him. And when Julius Caesar was executed, the people of Rome were outraged, and they felt that it was terribly unfair what had happened. It threw Rome into a chaos for a period of several years, and finally it was resolved by a civil war that ended the republic. And after that, it was simply a dictatorship of people like Nero and Caligula and other famous demonic tyrants. I don't want to see our republic end. I want it to continue and to live on. And so I think we need to focus our attention not outwardly, but inwardly, and be on guard, make sure that what we do is consistent with the law. More importantly, we need to watch and make sure that other people are doing their civic obligations within the law. I don't think it's conservatives who pose the slightest risk to our republic, but I think these Marxist liberals are the ones who threaten the nation. That is the threat.
I couldn't agree more. Harley, we can wrap this up. We've covered a lot of territory, but I guess I would just like to talk a little bit about the election, vote counting. If we have an honest election, in my view, we don't have to worry about any of this, because in my view, President Trump will get 4 more years if there's an honest election. But here's the problem. Let me do a screen share. I spoke with Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, who was running for Senate and feels he was very much cheated in Massachusetts, and it's because the ballots get scanned, and Massachusetts has openly told him they don't save the scanned ballots. So the optical images weren't saved. Now the ballots exist, but they get locked up for 22 months, and they're not going to recount them. Anyway, all of the polling and internal data suggested that Dr. Shiva was going to win the primary, but then on election night, across the board, he was losing everywhere 60-40, 60-40, 60-40. So I asked him, Dr. Shiva, in your view, what should President Trump do to ensure an honest election? And here's what he had to say. But with all of these mail-in ballots, we're finding things in garbage cans now. We're seeing all sorts of fraud right now. Shiva, what are your thoughts on that? If you were President Trump, what would you do or say? How do you put an end to this?
Well, what I would do right now is, the first thing I would do is that I would say that all the votes should be hand counted. First step. Hand count it, Sean, because you can't trust anything else. Look, they can flip things fast. Second is, I would, if I were president, I would have the Federal Election Commission and the Attorney General indict the 3 people that we're talking about in Massachusetts. Charlie Baker, the Secretary of State, and he's got a beautiful case here. They are telling us, as I showed you through those emails, yeah, we deleted the ballots. We don't have to follow federal law. We do whatever the hell we want. They should be thrown in jail, criminal. That's what I would do, because he has an awesome opportunity, the president, with what we've discovered here. And I don't think it's just, coincidence that we found this out.
I'll just pause it there. Boy, I guess I'll turn it back to you guys. Your thoughts on how do we keep our republic when everything is so hopelessly corrupt and the deep state wants to end the republic and the mainstream media is in the pocket of the deep state?
Well, I think what Colonel Black was referring to earlier, the importance of what you're doing, what many other people are trying to do to get the story out, you cannot underestimate the importance of that. Or overestimate. I mean, it's totally important that this exposure take place. But I think there's one other thing, and I think the president could do more on this, which is that he's done an excellent job exposing and fighting the coup and bringing people like Comey and Brennan and Clapper and McCabe and all the others to public attention. But what has to be done is pull it all together. What is the reason for this coup? Why are they doing this? And this takes us back to what he did in 2016, when he said his commitment is to end the endless wars. His opponents want to continue the endless wars. That's the distinction. And were he to make that clear day after day, and he does bring it up. He brought it up at West Point, he brought it up in the rally in Harrisburg the other night, but make that a central feature of his thematic campaign, so that the American people realize that the issue here is precisely what we've been talking about, to save the republic from a war party, from an austerity party, from a bunch of speculative swindlers who can buy politicians a dime a dozen. If he makes that point, then there won't even be a close election, because Joe Biden is running on what? Anti-growth policy, defense of rioters as peaceful protesters, it's support of the wars. What did Biden do as vice president? He was vice president when Obama expanded every single war that Bush had started and launched new ones, like the Libyan coup. Like Biden personally presided over the Ukraine coup of February 2014. So if President Trump makes that point, it's a question of ending the wars, putting the country back to work, rebuilding our manufacturing, taking the country back from the central bankers. I think he'll win in a landslide. But if he doesn't, then it's a crapshoot. And I think the Supreme Court appointment, assuming that goes through, will help to some extent. What Colonel Black is doing and others are doing to expose the military possible involvement in a coup also helps. But every one of your viewers needs to do their share to make sure this story gets out. And I think that's the most important thing we have to do.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Harley. And Colonel Black, thank you so much. Is there a way people can follow you? Are you on social media at all?
Yes, I am. They can check us out on senatorblack.com. We've got a website up there, and I believe they can communicate with me through that if they like to. But I'd be happy to hear from anyone online, and I'm always interested in people, whether it's pro or con. I'm just kind of interested in what people think these days.
Well, one last question then for you. If the election does go the way that I fear it might, with all sorts of malfeasance, ballot harvesting, if there's evidence that the election is tipped in Biden's favor that's glaringly obvious, do you support the president's option of contesting the election? What would you do if you were President Trump and all the evidence lined up that this thing was stolen?
Well, I think he's going to have to make a determination at the time based on the facts in hand. I think just as senators and congressmen can contest elections, I think that it would be appropriate for him to do so. Now, I think he needs to, of course, go through normal channels. He can work with the Congress. He can work with the Supreme Court, and but whatever it is, it needs to be legitimate channels. I don't think either side needs to attempt to involve the military in the settlement of a contested election. That's clearly an unlawful thing to do. Right. And I don't think he would try to do that. I think whatever he does at the time will be based on the situation at the moment. It will depend on the political force that he can muster, and we'll just have to see. I think he'll have to make that decision based on the facts at the time.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. Harley, you're always so generous with your time, and I know people can reach out to you directly, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm in touch with a lot of your viewers. harleysch@gmail.com. If you write to me, it's harleysch@gmail.com. I'll send you a link to my blog page where I have an article that I post every single week on precisely what we've been discussing today. So harleysch@gmail.com.
Okay, perfect. Guys, our guests have been Harley Schlanger, my longtime friend from LaRouche PAC, and Colonel Richard Black. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Well, thank you.
All right. And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll remind you, for real news, you can visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda. God bless, friends, and may God bless the Republic. Bye-bye.
That's what has occurred here in Massachusetts. Our central message is Massachusetts destroyed over 1 million ballots, period. And second messaging here is the election is null and void.